All right, welcome everyone. I think we can get started here. So this is episode 11 of software package deconstruction. We're going to talk about VPNs. We're going to take a look at a couple different kinds: open source, closed source, and then we have an SSL VPN in here just for comparison. So we'll take a look at the software you guys use every day. This is a pretty valuable tool. This is really what supply chain analysis should look like. We'll show you the assessment. We'll go through some slides. I'll give you all the information about the assessment up front, and then we'll go into the platform. We'll show you how we came up with this kind of stuff and show you what this should look like and how to assess a package, and by extension, assess the vendor that's delivering this package. Right? This should be part of your everyday stuff. All of this is built around a TPRM, third-party risk management use case, where if you're the software consumer, how can you trust the software you're getting? In the past, we've done our best with vulnerability analysis, scanning, sometimes dynamic sandboxes, but they're not enough, right? So new tooling has opened up new visibility, right? This is our tool runs off of static binary analysis. So we can see deeper into the package and give you a look into what's under the covers, what's going on behind the scenes, how it's built, and how it's improved over time. So ReversingLabs, we are a small company. We're based out of the US and Croatia. This is what we're trying to do here is, build use our static analysis engine that we've had in production for 15 years now. It's proven, and we've converted that engine. We're using that same core engine that we used to use for malware and threat hunting. And now we converted it over to use for this type of use case, right? For software analysis, right? And supply chain analysis. So this is the core of what we do. This is the stuff we're going to talk about here. This is part of the assessment, right? So these are the three packages we're going to discuss. We'll start with an open source package, OpenVPN. This is the open source VPN client. Should work with any standardized VPN connection. Doesn't matter what's on the other side, what you're connecting to. This should work. It's customizable. It's been around a long time. So we'll take a look at what open source code for this solution looks like versus closed source and vendor code, and get a sense of how that differs. So we may, blow out of the water some of your preconceived notions about open source here or about closed source. So these are the sort of things we're going to talk about as part of this review, right? We've talked a lot about these different elements in past episodes. File rot is going to show up here a lot. It shows up in most packages. We did a whole episode on that back in episode 4 if you want to check that out, but we'll cover all the details here. But we're looking at package composition, right? Is it how much vendor code versus open source code? File rot looks into, okay, those third-party components, whether it's, something, a DLL from Microsoft, or it's an open source project from somewhere. File rot looks at the ages of those components, right? This is mostly a dependency element. Vendors check their own code. There's multiple tools throughout their CI/CD pipeline to check for stuff before it gets to the final build. And that's where SSCS is differentiated from all the existing solutions, because we scan that final package. Once everything's in there, all the dependencies are in there, then we run our scan. So you may, have an SBOM from another tool, or you may ask a vendor for an SBOM, but it depends on where in the pipeline that is created as to what it's a list of ingredients, right? So if you're going to do that early in the process, you're going to get a different list than you would when you do the final package. So we can give you that complete SBOM, so you know exactly what's in it, all the dependencies, because really most times the dependencies are the problem, and those are things that don't really get looked at. Developers have a hard time. They're playing the same, do more with less game that everyone else is, and there's always a drive to fix bugs and new features. So if something isn't broke and it just keeps working, it doesn't get looked at. So what we see is these components just age out over time. And that means over time, they pick up additional CVEs, and they pick up, as programming best practices develop over time, these are just a snapshot. So when you start seeing elements in your package that are 5, 6, 8, 18 years old, and we see a lot of that, those are built from a different time with a different set of standards. And that's why you see all these new CVEs, these new issues popping up on those things, because it just rots over time. So we'll show you that in the reporting, and we'll discuss how that impacts some of these things. Another thing is the behaviors, right? That's another benefit of static analysis, is we, decompile everything in the package, and then we scan all the software components, we can tell what it actually can do. So it's a list of capabilities. Now, whether those may be in use or not, which element gets used, it's hard to say unless it's your code. But we know that it's in there, right? We can tell you if your VPN client can speak FTP. Not a great thing normally, definitely not a great thing in your VPN client. So we'll discuss all that. Just want to give you an overview of the things we're going to talk about. And then by extension, right, if you're looking at this package and then you leverage diff reporting, which we'll show you, it's just focuses on the differences from one release to the next. So it narrows the scope of your investigation. And that once you get that initial analysis done, you do that initial review, then you just start running each update. And then all you have to look is what changed from previous version to the new version. And does anything stand out as suspicious, right? When you're doing the diff reporting, when there's a new release that comes out, you can compare what you see in the changes to the release notes from the vendor. Do the behaviors match what they're saying just came into the package? Did anything else change? Is there new networking elements? All these things give you a sense of what the vendor is doing. Over time and over releases, do the count of issues drop, or do they just steadily increase with every release? That gives you a sense of what that vendor is doing and how seriously they take the security of the products that you're going to run on your network. So this is part of the normal, software supply chain life cycle. So this fits into two different use cases you would use here. This is the kind of thing you want to do before you purchase a piece of software. So you know what's in there, you know what kind of issues you may have, and you can tell by running a couple of different packages before you run if the vendor is continually improving their software or it just gets worse and worse and worse over time. So that's how you evaluate the risk in these things. Application monitoring is that ongoing monitoring after you make that purchase, after it's on the network, or things you're running on your network now, you can start analyzing. You do that first review through all of the issues and all the notes in the reporting. After that, you just monitor the diffs. That makes it easily repeatable, and you don't need to be a reverse engineer to do this. So the first one we'll talk about is OpenVPN. Open source, anybody can use it. OpenVPN has services they build on top of this, but anybody can use this. It's compact size, which is great. Attack surface is a real thing in security in software as well as your network. The larger it is, the more capabilities it has, the more attack surface it has. So we like to see, when you're looking at your software, I want to see it built specifically to serve a purpose and not do a million things. The more stuff it does, the more chance you can get hit, the more chance there'll be a critical vulnerability like Log4j. So, these components are what you have to really pay attention to. So this is actually a really good build. Not a lot of issues, as you can see over the right here. There's no malware detected. We have a handful of vulnerabilities. And there's some sensitive information, which is just an embedded key, which happens. It's, older. Part of the intel we deliver is this package that you'll see in the examples. Tells you how old a key is, right? That's built off of our corpus of malware and goodwares. We keep track of these secrets. And when we've first seen them, the same way, security companies keep track of the first time they saw a piece of malware, we'll keep track of when we first saw a secret. It's a bigger issue if that secret is only a couple of days old, because then it could be a leakage. But if it's been in that package for a couple of months and it's like a private key or something, there are reasons you would have a private key in software. So sometimes you have no way to know it unless you contact a vendor. And it's not your code, so sometimes that's the only way. But you have this visibility and ask real questions to your vendor. You should get a legitimate answer. At the bottom here, this picture we see at the bottom, this is what we're talking about these diff reports. So two elements of OpenVPN here, two versions in a row, and you can see how the count of high, medium, and low vulnerabilities drops from one version to the next, right? So that's what you want to see in your vendor over time. Every release is going to have something in it. It could be configuration changes. It could be, new features, bug fixes, whatever. But as new things get added to the code, you will eventually start seeing these counts tick up. But what I want to see is, sure, we had a new major release and you added a bunch of new features and maybe the counts went up. The next release or the next 2 or 3 releases, I want to see those things get ticked back down. Otherwise, the risk just grows and grows on your networks. These are kind of things you have to pay attention to. So we look at Checkpoint, much larger package. There are some issues with this, and we'll talk about that. I have some examples here, but The diff reports, because they reveal issues or anything that happens between one version to the next, that also includes behaviors. So when you look at a diff report and it's just a bug fix or something, but then there is a behavioral change and a behavioral change that impacts something critical, that's a huge red flag. And the nice thing about doing this is, you don't have to be a reverse engineer. You don't have to have 20 years in security to know this stuff. If something doesn't look right as a consumer, you just don't push it until you get a satisfactory answer from the vendor, or in another release they fix that thing. That's all you need to know to say, no, wait a minute, this is too much risk. I don't understand why this is doing this. I'm not going to push this version. We're going to wait. So this gives you more power to defend your networks preemptively, right? Don't be chasing things after you just throw them on blindly. This is, gives you a lot of visibility. It gives a lot of power back to the consumer. So you can see there are a lot of vulnerabilities, and these reports can be tuned just like any other tool. So you can turn on policies, turn them off. So this is a TPRM based policy. There's a lot of developer issues that we have available for consumer or producers, but they don't make a lot of sense to consumers. You don't have the code to look at to tell whether it's good or bad. And there's some things that you'll never look at, like low vulnerabilities. No one has time for that, right? So I turn a lot of that stuff off in this policy to reduce that noise and focus on what matters. So even with that reduced set, there's a significant amount of vulnerabilities in here. Now, if we look at the right where it says total vulnerabilities, that's the count, the complete count. So there's 186 vulnerabilities in this VPN software. This is part of your risk assessment. Do you need to know more than that? And then at the bottom here, we see that example of file route that we talked about. So this is a VPN software, and they're leveraging a third-party component called OpenSSL. Again, it's similar to OpenVPN, where it's an SSL encryption component that a lot of people use, right? It's sort of like zlib. If you have an application that does any kind of file work, compression, decompression, it's going to use zlib, as everyone uses that. Why write your own code when you have that? Same thing here. OpenSSL is a piece that vendors will build their code around. There's a lot of this stuff out there. Open source or third-party code sort of makes up, depending on who you talk to, anywhere from 50 to 80% of software packages. And what we see sort of aligns with that. But those are also things that slip through the cracks, because once it's in and it works, the vendors don't look at those things anymore. And here's what we see, an example. There are two different versions of OpenSSL in this package. We see that a lot, right? It gets thrown in, it's working, and when they need to develop a new component, they forget that they already have it in there, and then they just grab a new version. So these are additional dependencies. So the latest version is 3.1.3. They're using two different versions, both from 2016. So the SSL encryption component of your VPN is that far out of date. There's your risk assessment. Right? Do you really need to know more than that to make an assessment of this software? You can keep digging, but this is as far as you need to go to say, wait a minute, especially if you're doing a purchase and you're comparing 2, 3, 4 of these, which you should, then you get a sense of, like we're going to show today, right? Is you can compare across them. You can tell what behaviors are consistent across a set of solutions, sort of baseline what's normal, and then pick the one that works best for you. And sure, it's going to be about pricing and features and all the other stuff, but it should be about security. This piece should be part of that decision. So you're not putting these things on your network that you're going to pay for over the next few years and constantly have to chase vulnerabilities for. And then we did come up with a security issue. We talked about the diff reports, right? So the nice thing about the diff reports is, and the behavior pieces, this is exactly what we did, is we looked at from one version to the next. We looked at, you can see the drop down here where I want to look at just the files that changed. So what was in the package before and is also in this new version, but then which ones had behavioral changes between the two. So we see two files in this latest update of the Checkpoint VPN, their client, that make references to LSAS as a critical OS component. And all of a sudden it has to reference those, but it didn't last version, right? So these are the kind of things that stand out to you. And from a security perspective, again, I don't need to know why. I don't have to have all those answers. That's what the vendor's for. But I can go to them and say, hey, listen, this changed. Explain to me what this is doing and why this is in here. And that's enough for you to not deploy this version and wait. Right. So again, it seems hard. And when we see the reports, it seems like there's a lot going on, but really these are basic kind of things. It just makes sense to you. We also provide file level details, signature details, all this other stuff, the install file path where it's going to be. And sometimes that gives you clues to, make your investigation more powerful, to deliver more information to the vendor to get a better answer. So in this case, we see Zone Labs is part of the file structure. Well, that's interesting. If anyone's been around for a long time, you may remember back in the olden days, Zone Labs was a free host-based firewall. It was pretty good too. I remember using it a long time ago. Well, looks like Checkpoint bought them and bought that code and are using pieces of that in here. So you can go back to the vendor and say, in this component, in this file structure, there's this issue. And that's a quicker way to get an actual answer back. So we want a SonicWall. Again, this is a little bit different than the other ones. This is an SSL VPN, similar to the OpenSSL component we talked about just before. So this gives you a sense of what's going on. So this is even smaller, 12 megs, really, really small. Love this, right? Love small purpose-built things that just do what they're meant to do. No bloat, no extra crap, no, third-party components that they're not using anymore but never took out. This is good. This is what you want to see in software. There's some issues with the vendor code, some of the dependencies in that, but there's a low vulnerability count overall. So those dependencies aren't too out of date. And here we get to see a sense, right? So in the bottom of that picture, you can see all the information we give you when you're looking through this. And we'll show you in the report too, but I just wanted to highlight this, that you get, we give you the information all in one spot to make your assessment. So this file had an issue. I clicked on that file to take a look at it. And here's all you get. You see all of the issues with this one file. So, hey, I saw an issue. And your next step is, what else does that file do? What other problems does this file have? Well, we just give it to you right there. Just one click. You don't have to go copy and paste from 12 different places. We give you the hashes, the file information, the signature information, who's the publisher. So now we can see this is vendor code that has these issues in it, right? 2 of them are critical. Some of them are lower. But again, it's part of your risk assessment. On the bottom left-hand corner of that picture, you can see some, behavioral elements to, again, to give you a sense of what this file does, what its capabilities are. Does it have network components? Maybe some of those vulnerabilities that are network accessible don't matter unless the component is actually doing network communications. So there's a lot of this sort of math behind the scenes when you're figuring out the risk assessment, but we give you all that information here to make it easier for you to do that. Again, you don't have to be an expert to be able to handle this stuff. It's not too bad. So let us go to the samples. So this is OpenVPN. This is the first one we talked about. Again, you can see, right, 85 megs up here. A couple issues at the top, right? When we said there are issues in here, there are always issues. There's always vulnerabilities. Nothing is perfect. Set your expectations, but there are limits, right? I don't mind seeing third-party components in a package that are maybe 2 or 3 years old. That's fine, right? It's realistic. But when you start getting 7, 8, 9 years old, you run into really critical things at that age point, right? That's where you see, some of these older cryptographic functions are deprecated. So you may have components in your VPN that are using older cryptographic libraries, which makes your stuff weaker, right? So all of these things, right, they tie to the function of the program. And when you put them all together, it paints a pretty clear picture of whether or not you should be using the software or moving another vendor or deciding whether or not to purchase. So another really great element here is the number of components, right? So this is the number of software components in this package. Low number, small package, consistent. But this verified piece helps a lot. Again, this is more of our intel being pushed into it, is where we're always crawling third-party repositories, pulling down these packages, pulling all these other things. And we can tell you if the component in this package is the same as it was from the source. So if you're using open source stuff like zlib or some of the OpenSSL, some of the things we talked about, we've already done that. We've pulled that too. And we can tell if the version is a match. So now we can tell out of 33 components, 27 are direct from the source, no tampering. That's pretty powerful, right? And this is a higher average than we normally see. So this is really great. And remember, this is an open source package too. Community built, community driven. So open source isn't always the sewer that a lot of people think it is. We come down here and take a look at the SBOM. Now you hear a lot about SBOMs, and we discussed this earlier, but your level of visibility depends on when you run that scan and when you get that list of ingredients. Here, this is that full list. So you can search through, we can look at how many vendors. I like this because it's an easy way to get a sense of how much third-party open source stuff is in a package. There are a lot of times where you have to scroll down 3, 4 pages in this list because there's so many third-party elements in here. And a lot of them will be from GitHub and all these sketchy places where you can see that clearly here. So one of the things I like to look at is unknown publishers. But here we see OpenVPN Connect. So it's a lot of their own code. It's just not, they don't have the metadata to show that they published it. It's not signed, which is common too, but that's good, right? This is usually where you see the weird, sketchy stuff from GitHub because there's no publisher information in there. So this looks good, right? There's all .NET, Google. So this is good stuff. It's mostly their code with a couple of third party, but you're not seeing a ton of open source, although we will see that in the dependency side. So again, it's just a quick review, and now we're looking at all the issues in this package. Again, we saw this screenshot earlier. We'll look at the vulnerabilities. There's not too bad. We have actively exploited vulnerabilities, but there's only one file. So I'll click on this and it'll show me the file. And this is the page we saw on one of the slides. So now this is their file, OpenVPN Connect. They're the publishers. Here's all the behaviors. So we can see it does a lot of stuff. And again, this is VPN software. I would expect to see a lot of networking stuff in here, a lot of cryptographic stuff in here. So we do see that in here. But if it's a file that doesn't, if it's a larger package and you don't know what these components are, this gives you a sense of whether or not the vulnerabilities that match up to this matter. Is it doing those things? Is it able to do weird things like it can run SQL queries? That's weird, right? HTTP, I expect that kind of traffic. So it just gives you a sense of what's going on and whether or not you need to pull the thread further or kick this to another security team to dig in deeper and switch to another tool. We talked about the secrets. Again, they're right here. So all of the issues with this file and any secrets that are available. And here we talk about the exposed piece, right, where this key has been exposed for about 3 months. So, and again, there are legitimate reasons that you would have a private key in here as a back end to a service connection or something. It does happen, but the ones you really need to worry about, again, you don't have to have the answers. You don't have to know why this is in there. But if it's something new and it's just been out in this release, so you run the update and you're looking at the report, and some of the secrets are 2-3 days old, or like we've never seen them before. Again, that's another reason to hold off, not deploy this, check with the vendor, make sure. But it gives you that option. Otherwise, you would never know it's in there. So this is all, you should be doing these scans, security tooling or not, you should be doing these scans on a lot of the software you use. And then we'll look at some of the behaviors. Right. So signatures, again, we talked about digital signing, and this is what we see. This is where the file route will show up. I mean, it's more extensive than this because not all files are signed, but you get a sense of how old some of these are. So this is great, right? Their own code. It's only over a year old. That's fine. You have to expect some of that. There's going to be some drift, but when you start seeing, when you open this up and the first couple are like over 10 years old, 10 years old, 8 years old, right? Then you might have an issue, because if they're not taking care of the things that are signed, then they're definitely not taking care of the things that are unsigned. So again, this is part of that, taking the report and then leveraging it to assess your vendor themselves. So there's a lot of power in this information. You don't have to dig too deep. Go into the behaviors. Again, we have this split up by categories, but let's look at the networking behaviors, because again, I would expect there to be a lot of networking behaviors here. Oh, it's only 13. It's actually not too bad. But here's where we see tampers with DNS. Okay, well, it's going to, use a proxy or make a connection through another tunnel. I'm not, HTTP. FTP is a little sketchy. I'm not really a huge fan of that, but you would be surprised how many packages we still see using this. And that would be another thing to reach out to the vendor is, this is in the code, but are you actively using it? Or you could just, on your network, you could flat out just go on your EDR and say, I don't want this to ever talk via FTP, and done. You've closed that hole. Then it doesn't have to matter. So that was, a pretty big overview. Some of the vulnerabilities, again, another good way to check and see what's vulnerable is we show you just a list, right? And there are 2 agent components that account for all the vulnerabilities. OpenSSL. Look at that. We see that again. And libtiff. Another one we see used a lot, but it's a quick way to say, okay, where are the issues, right? You really have to have a problem if you open this up and it's not third-party code, it's a vendor component. Then that means they're not even checking their own code that they're building to put in these packages when they ship. So again, it's all about the visibility. So let's take a look at another one. This is the checkpoint software. And here's where the diff reporting sort of helps over time. Is when you see multiple releases like this, we can show you over time. 8.6.5 had, 60 highs. 8.6.8 reduced them a little bit. And that's really what you want to see. It's just improvement over time. At the very least, you want those numbers to stay static. and go up by 1 or 2 every release. I still want to see them reduced. And as we've seen in some of these cases, it's that third-party code that's aging out that has all these vulnerabilities. So you can fix most of the problems in your software if you just update your components. But that depends on how your level of visibility. Can you see all the things in your components or in your software, and are you scanning that final package? Otherwise, you miss this stuff. So this gives you a sense of the vendor. And we can see between releases, we'll get another breakdown. So between the last release over here and this release, we're pretty steady. So there's some changes, but they weren't in really critical areas. So that's good, right? That's okay. But I'd like to see more of this here where it goes from 62 to 59, even just 1 or 2 every time. But again, that's a reflection of the vendor and what they're doing. So let's look at that latest report. And again, a lot of issues at the top. We have these maturity levels to sort of help. We've talked about these on other episodes. I won't get too deep, but this gives you a sense of the maturity of the program, right? If they're level 1 issues, which is like malware, tampering, really critical stuff, you don't ever want to deploy software that has issues in level 1. Even level 2, you shouldn't see. Sometimes you'll just see patching mandated CVEs, which, again, it's excusable to a point. But then when you get up to level 3, level 4, and 5, it's more vulnerabilities here. And then we get high, sort of nice to have stuff that you really wish your vendors would have, but no one does all these things. So again, you have to be realistic. So bill of materials, this is a larger package, or it's actually not too bad, but 136 components in this one, right? So there's more complexity in here, 136 components, and only 60 are verified. It's only about half. Less sort of validity of all those components. And that could just be a function of, let's see whose publishers, whose stuff is in here. Yeah, so it looks like a lot of this code is checkpoint. Let's see. So 48 and 33. All right, so like 90 some components are checkpoint. All right, well, those can't be verified usually, so that's okay. If there's a lot of open source here and then they're not verified, then that's another security issue. And again, you don't have to connect all those dots. You can see it in the counts. If we go to the issues here, we can see there's a lot of vulnerabilities. Actively exploited vulnerabilities. 13 different files have those. Here's the 13 files, and we can look down and see. It's checkpoint. Checkpoint. Right, so these issues are tied to their own code, as opposed to third-party code. So that's all part of the risk assessment, looking at what this stuff does. Again, behaviors, looking at behaviors. Let's look at the networking here and see what the network behaviors are here. All right, 14, not bad. The previous one only had 13. So this is, again, it aligns with what we expect based on what we've seen in the first 2 packages. FTP, again, maybe you just can't get away from that. Tampered DNS. All right, this is how you get a sense of normal, especially if you're doing this in a purchasing component, right? Earlier in that stage, if you're comparing 2 or 3 different applications that do the same thing, this is a good way to tell what it should be doing and which ones have a lot of extra bloat and crap in there. And if you can't tie that back to a critical service or a critical feature that you want, then maybe you let that one go because it's more attack surface that you have to manage and you have to worry about that. In the diffs, again, this is the diff report we talked about. That's what the difference between we saw in that beginning chart is how the counts tick up from version to version. This is the diff between this version, the latest version, and the previous version. So we can see there were 53 changes. All right, so no new features are pushed in. So this is probably a lot of config and bug stuff. You can verify that by going to the release notes and seeing whether they're in those. So they didn't fix anything. Again, we saw that in reporting. No issues got fixed from previous version, but no new issues got added either. So it's sort of a wash. But if we look down here, this is where the behavior piece comes in. So I want to see just the files that changed. So if it existed in the last one and it's in this version, I want to just look at those. I don't want to just see the ones that have behavioral changes. And that reduces this by a lot. So it's not a ton of material you have to get through when you're doing this. That's what makes this a repeatable process. And if you look at a couple of these here, this is where we saw that ZoneLabs element that we talked about in the slide. This file was in the previous version, and it has this plus sign says behavior is added, but this is the behavior that was added. A reference to lsas.exe. Again, shouldn't see that. It's a valid question to ask why. And to me, that's a reason not to deploy this version until you get a good answer. Because it never happened before, it's not necessary. Why was it added now? So again, it's all about visibility and layout and workflow. So let's go take a look at the last version we talked about. This is SonicWall. This is the SSL VPN, right? Again, across versions, we can see the counts. And they made really good progress between last version and this version. There were more vulnerabilities in the previous version. Now they're down to 3, right? Again, this is all about the vendor, what they take seriously and what they're going to spend time and effort and resources in fixing. This is great. This tells me that this vendor is actually taking care. They're running, the tools in their CI/CD pipeline to catch these things and fix them. So that, again, versus Checkpoint, who doesn't look like they have this level of visibility and they're seeing these things, or they would fix them. So this is, again, a great view over time to see if it changes. And this tells you whether or not you need to bother digging into the diff. If there's no changes, then maybe you don't even have to worry about it. So let's take a look at that actual report. Again, not that many issues, which is great. Smaller package, 12 meg. Again, love that. Love to see smaller size. I don't want to see the bloat because that's more stuff I have to worry about. We see some L2 issues here. Patching mandated. Again, we'll take a look and see what that is, and some code signing issues. So again, here we'll look at the publisher. We get a sense of what's here, and this is all SonicWall. So there's doesn't look like a ton of code, a ton of open source code in here, which is great. Golang. All right, so this is part of WireGuard. It's just doesn't have the metadata. It's not signed. So that's really good, right? This is a good composition, or at least it gives you a sense. So lower risk level, hopefully, if they're taking the right care in their code. Looking at the issues, there's 60 issues, a couple of vulnerabilities, right? And you can come down here and see, which files have vulnerabilities. That tells a story of what's going on with this, right? Again, their code, some vulnerabilities, some, mitigations that aren't in place, basic mitigations too, ASLR, address space layout randomization. This was something that Microsoft introduced in Windows XP. And this code that the vendor's putting out doesn't have this. And the fix is just a change in your IDE. So some of these things, maybe aren't excusable. I would expect better in vendor code. But again, part of the assessment, while you're doing this package assessment, you'll see things that stick out to you about the vendor themselves. We go on here and look at digital signatures. Let's see what those issues were. Using expired certificate during cross-signing. Again, that's, it's not a critical security issue, but it shows the care and craftsmanship going into the building of this software. Now, is it third party? Nope. Yep, WireGuard. So I don't know how WireGuard relates to them. Let's see. Yep. So these are probably all going to be WireGuard related. Yep. There we go. So in this, the next step will be to figure out what WireGuard is. How, is it something that's actually owned by SonicWall? And then you go from there. It's not a critical thing, but a lot of those little things, and that's what software supply chain is. It's painting that picture across a lot of these different elements. There's not going to be a smoking gun a lot of the times. You have to look at a bunch of these different things, but they clearly stand out if you're looking at the data, especially if you're doing multiple packages, because you won't see anything anywhere, and all of a sudden in one vendor it shows up. Then you know it's a vendor issue. So again, we'll look at the behaviors. Let's look at the vulnerabilities and see where they're at. zlib, there's some Golang packages. Yep. So these are third-party elements. So the vulnerabilities aren't in the vendor code themselves, but the dependencies that the vendor code leverages. That's still within their visibility. That's still something they should see and be able to fix. Behaviors, let's see what the networking behaviors look like over here. Much less, right? Again, this is SSL VPN. You expect HTTP stuff, right? That's what it's built for. Look, no FTP. Perfect, right? The behaviors align with expectations and what what a VPN piece of software should do. When you start seeing extra stuff that doesn't make sense in here, that increases your risk. Right? And again, looking at the diff report, here's the issues that were fixed between last time. So 13 issues resolved from the last feature. That's good. You can take a look through what they are, right? So depth, that's another one of those mitigation issues. So it looks like they're fixing their code. They're taking a look at this stuff. But we did have some new issues added, more vulnerabilities. This happens. It's just, you have to keep up on this and pay attention from release to release. If you constantly see a lot more issues coming in and they're critical issues, or they're issues that actually, have an impact, vulnerabilities, attack surface kind of stuff, then your risk level is going to grow with that vendor. These are all things you should be taking a look at when you're purchasing or when you're going to renew. Take the chance to go look at other options and see how they stack up. do that apples to apples comparison. So not too bad overall. Not too many issues. Let's see the behavior changes here. So file changes, behavior changes. There are only 23, not too bad. And usually from different ports, it reduces that scope, and it's easier to go through and just click through and see what kind of things changed. Queries, drive types, services. These are interesting, but this could just be a config update, right? So I looked through this, nothing really stood out to be as bad. But again, if you're doing these diffs, you're doing every release, there's only ever going to be, maybe 100 different behavioral changes that you can dig through. And again, file path helps. Whether code is signed helps. Is it vendor code, third-party code? All these things go into it, but it's not that much. It looks like a lot of data, but it really isn't. So that was really all the elements we want to talk about, going across all the VPNs, just to show what's inside, how these things behave, and do a couple of different versions, right? So open source, not really that bad. Closed source can be kind of sketchy. So you can't have these preconceived notions. You have to go in and you have to go look. So this is all, based on our SSCS platform for supply chain security. SBOMs, exporting them in different formats. It does a lot of these different things, but we're going to just show it off and show you that it works for vendors as well as producers. So that's all for us. If you want to take a look at this platform, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so we'll just keep going. So there are trials available for this, right? You can get a 2-week trial if you sign up, and you can actually run packages through this. Run some of the packages you're using every day, some of the security tooling, some of the things you're running on your enterprise, and look behind the covers, see what actually is available. Right? The SBOMs and all these other things are coming. They're regulatory requirements. It's just going to get worse because this is a huge problem, and the tooling didn't exist to help address it. Now it does. Love to hear your questions. You're welcome to reach out to us afterwards. We'll answer any questions you have. If you want to ping me for discussions on this, if you can find me and find my address, I will answer all questions. Upcoming webinars. We're always doing really good content. We have a couple of really good ones coming up next week. I'm not going to read these to you. You have them. You'll get this slide deck, so you have that too. But take a look at some of this stuff. There's some really good stuff going on, and we're really collaborating with other partners like Pangea and Digicert and other things to really take this supply chain security to the next level. So thank you, everyone. Here's our information. If you have questions, reach out again. Anything we do to help. And hope you enjoyed it, and hope you guys learned something. So thank you very much for joining us.